This summary of Donker Web contains spoilers. Greg Owen's life is a mess. His dad, Chris Owen, and school principal, Doc Pienaar, tried to bribe a judge following a case of insider trading. Doc Pienaar then killed Judge Gericke. Following this, Chris Owen and Doc Pienaar made a lethal bird flu injection that set off a horrible pandemic. They were known as the Butcher and the Candlestick Maker. And Greg exposes all this, throwing his dad to the wolves. There is a lengthy court appearance with a strange woman, Valkyrie, attending each day. Finally, Chris Owen and Doc Pienaar is sentenced and sent to jail. Kgosi Mampuru too in Pretoria. But the baker is still at large. 1.5 years after writing matric and following the court case, Greg Owen sets off for Stellenbosch University to study sports science. His best friend Plank is also there. He makes friends with Chloe, the weird art student, and Plank's new girlfriend, Lisa. During the Fenster student celebrations, a strange woman, Valkyrie, keeps an eye on Greg. She even questions Plank, trying to find out more about Greg. Greg meets Lisa's dad, Dirk Schutte, an ex-police detective. People recognize Greg following his appearances in newspapers, magazines, and on the internet. Everyone wants to know if he's going to hunt down the baker as well. He finally decides that his dad and Doc Pienaar can't be the only ones paying for the crime. In an attempt to restore the honor of the family, he starts looking for the baker. Greg comes across a photo of his dad with a certain Dr. Rian Trollip. Was the doctor once at their house? Greg finds Dr. Trollip on the old Plus Ultramed website's organizational chart. Another report. Dr. Trollip was caught for acts against children and later, supposedly, hanged himself. A photo in the newspaper shows the funeral. Dr. Trollip's brother, Dr. Stadler, next to a woman, Valkyrie. Chris Owen is also in the photo with Dr. Pienaar behind him. The photo was taken in Greg's senior year around the time of Project Nursery Rhyme. Greg calls Mrs. Trollip. She's drunk and unwilling to help. Greg's investigation hits a dead end. He goes to see Dirk Schutte, who warns him to stay away from hacking. Eventually, Mrs. Trollip does send Greg help in the form of a burnt book, though Greg doesn't know it came from her. The burnt book contains strange names, chemical symbols, and the word Valkyrie. A mysterious motorcyclist is watching Greg. Greg goes to see his father in prison. He says he's going to look for the baker. His mom now has a boyfriend, Andre Symington. Greg's ex-girlfriend, Nicole, is waiting for him at home, and she now has a baby. Greg returns after Easter weekend. Someone has broken into his apartment. "You and your hacker buddy need to leave me alone," reads a message in the apartment. Greg goes to Thomas Lawson's party and meets Dr. Stadler. He hears childhood tales and stories about stuffed animals. Finally, Greg contacts Zander Gericke and asks for help. Zander's response is a strange one. Zander sends his hacker friend, Tom, to Stellenbosch. Tom is reluctant to help and is eventually found murdered. In class, Greg has a falling out with Professor Kabi from the University of Johannesburg, a visiting lecturer and a false suspect or red herring in the novel. Greg's mother is scared. She realizes she is being followed. Zander comes to Stellenbosch after receiving a video of Tom's corpse. Greg sets after him but finally loses track of Zander. Greg receives a terrifying message from the holding cells, a threat that his dad will be killed if he continues his search for the baker. Zander gets a video of his father, the judge, being murdered, and he contacts Greg. The video convinces Zander to help Greg track down the baker. Greg receives a laptop and a package from Dangerous Things containing a transponder. Greg has to get it implanted in his hand and send photographic proof to Zander. However, Greg and Chloe, the art student, manipulate a photo of Greg's hand. Plank implants the transponder in his own hand. Zander instructs Greg to come to Turkey. Plank has to come along since he has a transponder that unlocks the laptop. Greg and Plank arrive in Istanbul. Greg meets Zander at the Sunken Palace, also known as the Basilica Cistern. Zander realizes Greg deceived him when the new phone doesn't unlock with the transponder. Greg and Plank consider heading back home. However, Zander picks them up during breakfast at the hotel. His girlfriend Ayla convinced him to help. Zander is unimpressed that Plank came along. Zander lives in the Balat district. This is where Greg and Plank meet Ayla. Her parents work for Doctors Without Borders and she works for Freedom House. Greg tells Zander everything about his investigation, except for the burnt book. Zander wants to search for the baker on the dark web. Zander teaches Greg about the dark web. Zander destroys Plank's phone, calling it a security risk. When Zander and Ayla find the burnt book in Greg's bag, the trust is broken. Zander recognizes the chemicals mentioned in the book. They were used by the Russians in their Biopreparat project, as well as by Project Coast in South Africa. The guys decide to ask on the dark web for someone who can make a special poison, a new type of Novichok. This leads them to the Elsewhere website. Elsewhere has strange 1984-inspired fan fiction. Greg breaks the code and they contact Mr. Elsewhere. The baker reaches out to them with the message, Greg and Zander, who do you think you're playing with? To determine the baker's identity and location, Greg and Zander set a trap with a video. They discover the baker is in Florence, but Greg and Plank don't have visas. They order visas on the dark web. The baker's people break into Zander's house in Turkey. Greg, Plank, Zander and Ayla flee. Zander presents Greg with a tough choice. Choose between me and Plank. Greg leaves Plank behind in Istanbul. In Florence, a package arrives with a gun. The guys gain backdoor access to the baker's computer and find an address. Greg secretly visits the house. He sees the baker and a woman, Valkyrie, and they seem to know him. At the David statue, Greg has another encounter with the baker without realizing it. Staying one step ahead of the guys, the baker flees Florence. They follow him to Venice along with Lisa's dad, Dirk Schutte, who unexpectedly shows up. Is he the baker? Dirk informs them that Dr. Pienaar was murdered in jail and Greg's father is seriously injured. Dirk Schutte now lends a hand with the investigation. Greg suspects Ayla's dad might be the baker. He wonders if Zander is planning the next revenge attack. Greg is wrong, however. His relationship with Zander deteriorates further. Zander confesses that his revenge attack on the Owens was wrong, citing the Prometheus legend. Using a hacking technique, Greg secretly films the baker in his house. He realizes he has seen the baker before, but where? Uncle Dirk recognizes the baker as Dr. Sebastian Stadler. They use facial recognition technology to track Dr. Stadler in Venice. Eventually, this leads them to Plank. Plank leads Greg and the others to the Royal Gardens, where Valkyrie and the baker are waiting. The past unravels as Greg fights for his life after putting on a poisoned cap. Zander threatens Dr. Stadler with doxware. He is going to expose Dr. Stadler's new mind control project to the world. Dr. Stadler's description of Judge Gericke's horrible death disturbs Zander. Zander shoots Dr. Stadler dead, and Valkyrie flees. Greg and the others take a speedboat back. Greg and Xander make peace at last. But then Valkyrie and her guards appear. They shoot Plank dead. In the chaos, the media reports that Greg is dead. His name is found on the transponder in Plank's hand. Back in South Africa, Greg makes peace with his father. Finally outside the prison, Greg walks into Lisa's arms. He realizes that to survive in this life, you should not be bulletproof. You should be bomb-proof.